afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Audrey Lau, and I am the Adult and Senior Services Specialist with the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. Community Conversations are a partnership series between the Prince George's County Memorial Library System and the Office of Human Rights. And I want to take this time right now to thank them for their great partnership throughout the years, and particularly Tiana Davis for bringing this important conversation to us today. With me as co-hosts are Tiana and Kyla Hannington from the Office of Human Rights, can't talk, the county's Civil and Human Rights Education and Enforcement Agency. The Office of Human Rights has a great partnership with the University of Maryland's Capital Region Medical Center, and it is our pleasure today to welcome to this community conversation Kathryn Ferguson, who has been working to advance the rights of individuals impacted by violence in the state of Maryland for more than 20 years. A former crime victim specialist with the state of Maryland Division of Parole and Probation, Ms. Ferguson would go on to develop critical initiatives, programs, and policies relative to gender-based violence through her work with the Prince George's County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council and the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault. She currently serves as the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Center Community Outreach and Engagement Coordinator with the University of Maryland Medical System's Capital Region Medical Center. Welcome, Kathy. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Audrey.
For getting us started, could you just take a few minutes to tell us about the work that you do?
Well, I certainly will. But first, I'd just like to thank you for hosting this event. It's critically important in these days and times. And then also, too, make a connection with OHR. I appreciate your sponsorship of the event. Certainly, living violence-free is a human right. And so we are closely aligned in our missions in terms of that. So I do want to thank you. And I have actually a short PowerPoint, if you don't mind, and I can start with that. And again, just reintroduce myself as Kathryn Ferguson. I'm the Community Outreach and Engagement Coordinator here at the University of Maryland Capital Region Medical Center. I work in the Domestic Violence Sexual Assault Unit, which is a unit of dedicated individuals who work with and on behalf of individuals impacted by domestic and dating violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. We've been around for just over 50 years. I think in 1973, actually, I know in 1973, we were founded in large part by efforts by then Steny Hoyer, who was a representative for Maryland. And the program has grown exponentially. Many people may be familiar with us when we were housed at the Prince George's County Hospital located in Cheverly. But about 4 years ago, we actually moved our offices in the hospital to Largo, and we're now part of the University of Maryland Medical System. And again, we do great work with individuals who have the unfortunate experiences related to domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. We are the designated rape crisis center for the county. But while we are designated as a rape crisis center, certainly about half of our cases come from domestic violence related matters. And so at a time like this, which is October, where we actually pay attention to this issue through Domestic Violence Awareness Month initiatives, having this conversation and you all allowing me this platform is fundamentally and critically important to the work that we do and making sure that individuals are serviced correctly and know where they can go for help. So again, these are the 3 areas that we work in and around. You'll see them here highlighted on your screen. And here is our service array. And so you'll see that we categorize it into 5 different compartments. We've got medical support, which again would include things like medical accompaniment, forensic exams, and strangulation. And with all of these subsections, I'm happy to speak about them at more length later on. And if people have specific questions, I can go into those things a little bit more, but I'm just doing a quick overview. Our victim advocacy, which ties into our crisis hotline. Now, we are a 365-day operation, 24/7. We don't take days off. We don't have holidays. There's always somebody here that can respond to a call. And so whether individuals has experienced something in the immediate or yesterday or 2 weeks ago, 6 months ago, or even 10 years ago. We have individuals here that are able to help them in their journey to healing, connect them to care and services wherever they are. And I say that because sometimes people have had victimizations at earlier times in their lives, and then they're re-triggered. So we are able to connect them to whatever kind of services they may need. We do crisis intervention and case management. And then we have our criminal justice advocacy piece. We have dedicated advocates who will accompany individuals to speak with law enforcement, and also to go to court with them. And we're actually able to do participate in protective order hearings within the confines of the hospital. So if a person has had the unfortunate circumstance of being victimized and then has to be hospitalized for a short-term or long-term, we have the ability to connect with the courts, and actually have something done virtually to make sure that when they leave, they have that extra line of protection in their hands. We do housing advocacy, which is critically important. Housing is such a huge issue for individuals who are trying to leave unsafe homes and things of that nature. It's important that we have that work in place. And then our mental health services, where we do crisis counseling, we do long-term, short-term, individual and group types of therapy. In terms of our activities, this is sort of where most of my work is generated. As you'll see here, we have community partnerships, outreach and training, and professional development. The first two areas are sort of my main areas of activities, though there are some of my other colleagues that participate in different respects. For example, our committee memberships. We actually do serve on the Human Trafficking Task Force for the county, and that is run by your office, OHR, and we have individuals that participate in that. We participate in the fatality review team. We have a sexual assault response team that we sit on, and the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, to name a few. Currently, I am recruiting for volunteers, and I can elaborate on that a little bit more later as well. But for anybody watching that feels that they would like to volunteer with Domestic Violence Sexual Assault Center, we certainly have opportunities forthcoming for individuals to connect with us and help individuals, again, that have been impacted. We do donation drives. In fact, we're having the recipient of a donation drive this Saturday. There's an auto show in Brandywine that Angel's Wing is actually going to be hosting for us, where we'll be generating funds that will help us do things like give people track phones, give them safety equipment, clothing when they're needed, and things of that nature. And then the outreach and training, which, of course, this is one of the type of outreach events that I can do. Doing webinars, I go in person, I train with groups as small as 2 to groups as big as 250. I do it for law enforcement and other professional stakeholders, as well as community-based groups. Because the important thing is that we give this content and the information, we get it into the hands of people out in the community, because we know that they're more likely to actually interact with individuals who have experienced those issues. I will go really quickly with our professional development. We're actually in the process of developing a forensic nurses training program here. And so individuals that are interested, who are nurses, who are interested in becoming forensic nurses, they'll be able to participate in that program probably by next year in order to get their certification. And we do adult cases and pediatric cases. And feel free to stop me if you have any questions. But individuals impacted by domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking will seek some type of care at some point. 90% of individuals will connect with us for services. And so, again, we know that individuals who have scrapes, cuts, bruises, internal bleeding, strangulation, they're going to need those services. And so health providers are really in a good position to assist individuals, not only because of that, but just to screen in other cases. We have people that come in for phlebotomy, blood draws. We have people that come in for mother and babies, and we have questions and so forth that we can screen and that we can talk to with the clients, and they may disclose these issues, and then we can connect them with care. So typically individuals, again, who are experiencing those things are always going to come to some type of either hospital, clinic, dental office, some type of health services. And that's why it's really critically important that we are housed here at the hospital, because you really don't have to go much further than here in order to get all of your services and get connected to the level of care that will get you healed. And so I do want to point out that our particular program is the only comprehensive hospital-based program of its type in the state. And so, I just think that's deserving of some applause. We worked very hard to make sure that we increased our scope of services. As I said, we started back in 1973, but right around in the 2010, it went from just sexual assault servicing to the inclusion of domestic violence. And certainly, if you are a millennial, you may not remember this, or even a Gen Zer. But Kyla, I'm going to think that we might be in the same generation. We are Generation X. We are X-Men. There was a time when we would go to doctors' offices and you would just, have your examination and that was it. But for millennials and Gen Zers, and even us now, we know that whenever you go to a doctor's office, you're going to get that questionnaire and it's going to ask you, do you feel safe at home? And those type of questions. Have you experienced any physical violence and that type of thing? And all of that has to do with the work of individuals who've been working in this field for decades. And there are so many champions that I can count. But certainly having done it for 20 years, I can certainly say that, I was a part of those earlier conversations to make sure that those screening questions became law, in Maryland, and that every place that you go for any type of health servicing, you'll get those questions, because we want to make sure that people get connected to care, like I said. And so in terms of our numbers, in the fiscal year 2025, you'll see that we had we serviced over 780 individuals. So we had over 2,000 hotline calls that we did, and we provided 4,350 connections to service. And so that's a lot. That's a lot. And I will say that Prince George's County has the unfortunate distinction of leading often in the rates of domestic violence and sexual assault, for sure. We kind of go back and forth with Baltimore City in terms of who's the highest, but we're typically number one or number two in any given year, which is, again, we can talk about why those numbers are what they are. And there are a variety of factors and reasons that we can discuss and that attribute to that. But that's the case. And I will say that this year, unfortunately, thus far, we have been leading the state in regards to domestic violence related homicides. And so again, getting this message out, making sure that we connect with individuals, helping them understand the dynamics and helping them recognize it, and getting them to care is vitally important. And in terms of the experiences that individuals have coming to our center, no center is perfect, of course, but I like to report that 96% of our clients said that they felt safer after coming to our hospital. 98% of clients surveyed felt more self-sufficient. And we do want people to feel empowered. We want people to really enact their own agency and autonomy, because often in these cases, the whole concept is really to make them feel devalued and diminished. So the more that we can pour into individuals and help them understand their self-sufficiency and make them feel better, that's the best outcome. 99% of the clients surveyed felt more informed of their rights, which is critically important. And then 98% of clients surveyed felt more informed about the services and resources. And I do want to say that, we are an entity. We never tell people what they have to do. We never tell them what they should do. What we do is we give them all of the options that are available to them. and we are patient-centered. So we go with what they want to do. So if they want to involve law enforcement, we will work with them with regard to that. If they don't care to have law enforcement involved, we honor that as well. If they want to stay in the home, we want to honor that, even though we may feel like in certain cases that's not the best idea. But we will honor that, and we will try and help create safety plans for them to do so. But certainly, if they do want to leave, and that's a dangerous time, so it's understandable why they may not want to. But if they do choose to leave, we try and make sure that we can connect them and make that as safe as possible. So again, it's patient-centered, it's client-centered, or victim-centered, whatever phrase you want to use. But we let the individual inform our work, and we work with them to achieve the outcome that they would like as best as we can. But certainly there are no guarantees in terms of things once they leave our center. But when they're here, we certainly will do our level best to make sure that they are cared for to the utmost. And I'm going to leave the slides there at this point. You can take them off, and then we can just have some conversation. And if there's anything that, you felt you might want to, learn more about, or you just have some questions, I'm happy to answer.
Well, that was great. So thank you so much. I will say for viewers, we would love questions. So please type questions for Kathy into the chat where you're watching. We'll be able to share them with her as our time allows. And we really encourage you, if there's something that you want to ask, to please go ahead and do that. I actually, as you were talking, had a couple questions. One of the things that really came to mind just from what you were speaking about most recently, as you talked about Prince George's County leading the state currently, but also sometimes, on and off with Baltimore in terms of domestic violence rates. And one of my previous jobs in Canada, I was the co-chair of the Communities Violence Against Women and Relationships Committee. These committees were mandated by the provincial government that each community needed to have one. And one of the things that we looked at in that committee is that really domestic violence can sometimes be wrongly framed as a women's issue. It's either a human's issue or arguably, if you look at who most of the people who, the vast majority of people who are committing relational violence are men. And so therefore it's actually a man's issue. It's not, and so what I'm wondering is, you're talking about Prince George's County trying to reduce these rates. And this is something that, I did in my previous life. So I'm aware of this, but I'm not aware of it in Prince George's County. Is what is happening in Prince George's County that you know of that's looking at trying to, sort of, it's very important to help people who are being victimized in these situations, who are surviving these situations. But what is happening in Prince George's County to address the causes, to try to provide programs designed to help and provide support to offenders?
Oh, Kyla.
So is it re-offending?
Trick question, though. That is, it's actually, I can say there aren't a whole lot of services out there where we're targeting men. Certainly, there's some national organizations. I remember bringing in a call to men probably back in 2004. Which is the first time that we actually had somebody come and talk about men's accountability in terms of violence. And I do think it's important that I do share, because we certainly do consider these, we classify these things under several different categories. Gender-based violence, because overwhelmingly the victims tend to be women, and overwhelmingly the perpetrators are men. But we do know that the majority of men, the vast majority of men, are well-meaning men. They're good guys. So that sort of 2 to 9%, we'll say, maybe 2 to 7% of men that are the bad actors tend to always be the bad actors. So in this case, let's say I'm the bad person, and I'm going to be very particular about who I want to get with for the purposes, this is a predatory type of nature. It's power-based, crime really. It's power-based issues, not just gender-based. So I may go out with Audrey, and Audrey's, her leanings allow her to be more, vulnerabilities allow her to be preyed on more. And so I'll have that assaultive relationship with Audrey until it is no longer. And then maybe I try to date Tiana and Tiana's not with it and I can't get anywhere. So then Tiana and we break up real fast.
Right.
And then I meet Kyla, but then I'm going to do the same thing to Kyla because Kyla has those same kind of vulnerabilities as maybe Audrey did. So, those bad guys, they give the rest of the guys a really bad name. And so we have seen probably within the last 20 years or so that there's a shift in terms of where we put our attention. Now, in terms of Prince George's County, certainly we do have batterers intervention, which is very different than like anger management. Often people will come to court and they'll say they just want somebody to get help or their partner. And certainly too, I do want to honor the fact that I am being very heteronormative in my conversation. We know that this happens between same-sex couples, so I do want to acknowledge that for anybody that's out there. And it happens to all races, creeds, genders, ethnicities, and so forth. But I am going to default to that, where they want their perpetrator to have this batterers and have anger management. And they're like, this person just needs this help. And often we hear attorneys talk about that too, and they'll put them in anger management. But anger management is very different. A person that has anger issues is angry all the time. They're angry with anybody. So they're going to be angry with their boss. They're going to be angry with their associates, just general associates. They're going to be angry with the wait staff, whoever they encounter. They're going to have that level of like anger and abusive language and aggressive nature displayed. Batterer's intervention is very specific. It is really directed to the person that they're with. And they have to do a whole lot to get to the point where they can exact their power, their control, their influence, and their physicality on a person for the desired result. Because if I, again, am the bad person and I get with Audrey, I'm not going to start off by being, I'm just a bad person.
Right.
I'm not going to show
coercive control.
I'm going to groom. I'm going to, come at it a different angle. We're going to be like so in love really quickly, which is a sign. And, I'm going to make you think that it's like this, is this you and I against the world, and slowly flip the script. And then, eventually it's going to be the things where things turn. So we want to make sure that we are connecting offenders, perpetrators to appropriate servicing, which is that batterer's intervention, where they can go through, they can learn about their behaviors, learn why they're doing it. Certainly counseling is important. But I know that the Department of Family Services has a program. Elio Wade has been pretty instrumental in leading a lot of the men initiatives in the county that I know of here recently. And there used to be some other folks before, and I can't remember their names, but he's been really instrumental. He has a men's challenge program that he's been promoting that talks about this. And in fact, we actually are in the process of planning an event. I'm just waiting for, our room reservation. Hopefully that comes through. That we're going to be sponsoring a small or mini symposium, as it were, for men. It's a men's wellness event, and we're hoping to have that in November. And we'll be talking about these issues. We'll be talking about toxic masculinity, and we'll be talking about really addressing men from the inside out and some of the things that may cause them to perpetrate. And certainly one of the core factors and critical issues related to their involvement in this and exacting this type of violence has to do with what they were exposed to as a young person.
Right.
And that's actually for people on the receiving end as well. What you see in your household growing up becomes normal. And so if expressions of love and declared love comes with physical violence, that's what you tend to repeat. And you're just kind of going with what you're seeing. And because you don't live in anybody else's household, you don't know that it's not happening in your neighbor's household. You think that's just how everybody is. And so, there's a lot that can be done. There's a lot that should be done. But that's the only program. His program is about the only one that I know of that is really concentrating on that. I shouldn't say that, because I know that Felipe, who works with OHR, has worked with him as well. I think they had a Father's Day pledge and that kind of thing. So, and I know the fraternity, Kappa Alpha Psi, has been pretty instrumental in trying to do things relative to, they've been involved in the domestic violence fight. I don't know how much they're doing in terms of educating their men, but I know that they're willing and on board. So I have to give them a shout out for that. But yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. It would be nice to have what you all had in Canada, that's for sure.
It just really reminded me of that. And I mean, we had a multi-pronged approach. Of course, there's so many parts of it, but that was it. Just as you were talking about Prince George's County kind of being at the top, and it's like, well, how do we get to the solving of the, and so I really appreciate that detailed answer, which I know I did throw it at you, and that was not what you were necessarily here to talk about, but I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that you gave. And also for those listening, there were some resources that were mentioned. For instance, the Department of Family Services, Prince George's County Department of Family Services, you heard Kathy mention as having different programs. So definitely, if that's something that you want to learn more about, we encourage you to do that. I'm going to ask one more question, Kathy, and then I'm going to give it to Audrey and Tiana. I was curious again, as you were talking, you talked about that 90% of individuals impacted by domestic violence, sexual assault, or human trafficking will seek some kind of health-related care. And you mentioned screening questions that are offered. And I guess, I also was, I think you said that the Domestic Violence Sexual Assault Center was founded in 1973. I also was founded in 1973. So you are correct that, I, as a Gen Xer, I had a different, my experiences maybe are different, but having when I was really young, but that this, we have these screening questions. But what I'm wondering is, how hard is it, even in these medical settings, like what are you hearing or what are you learning about people being able to disclose to anyone when they're in these very difficult situations?
Well, here's the crazy thing. So you saw the numbers that I had up. I think it was like 4,000 services. We would say we had 780 clients. And that's just our center. And I mean, I was at the Purple Lights night, yesterday, and there were a slew of service providers. I want to say there's at least 12 of us there. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Almost every big ministry here in the county has some type of domestic violence programming. Not that many have sexual assault, and I probably would like to talk about that a little bit at some point. But there are plenty of agencies that are doing this work, and yet we know that it's still underreported. That's the crazy thing. We know that it's underreported, and we know that for sort of more marginalized individuals, it's even more so the case. So yeah, if you are a man, if you do identify as part of the LGBT, QIA community and different things, if you may be foreign-born immigrant here, we know that there's even further underreporting. So that just shows you just how big this, just how rampant this issue is. And so I actually forgot your question, where I was going with that.
Just how challenging is it for people who are survivors of sexual assault, for survivors of human trafficking or in the life currently, or survivors of domestic violence in these situations. So currently in these situations, or how difficult is it, even with these screening questions, to be able to talk?
It is very difficult. It is very difficult. So they will come for help. And some might even bypass those questions and may not be forthcoming. And I think that's why it's so critically, again, important that people like me and folks that you see out in the field, out in the community, whether it's a Saturday afternoon, giving their time towards these efforts, is because we know that getting this information into the hands of just everyday, regular schmegular, folks is crucially important, because most people will tell a friend, especially if they're young, will tell their friend before they tell their mom. They might tell an aunt, before they tell their father. And so they may talk to somebody in the church. They may talk to, and that's one of the reasons why there is such an outgrowth of this in the churches, is that people were going to their pastors talking about this issue, and they were often ill-equipped with, being able to give them information. The norm was, you just have to, pray about it and it will just take care of itself, or just keep praying about it. And so, it is very difficult. And there are a variety of reasons. There are a lot of barriers. There's, shame, a lot of stigmas attached to that. We've had, individuals who had, PhDs and, in the highest rungs of, government who have experienced it. And it's like, how do you go someplace and, disclose that this happened? So there's a lot of that happens, a lot of that shame. There are other barriers, again, not fearing maybe deportation, fearing some other kind of governmental consequence for individuals who may be living in Section 8 housing, where they require vouchers and so forth. Admitting it may get them kicked out of their housing. So there are a variety of reasons and barriers to why people do not report. But people will still go to the doctor. And so that's, again, why it's critically important. So, and you can ask questions, in different ways, and that's why you'll see on those forms, you'll never see it say like, are you a victim of domestic violence? Have you been sexually assaulted? They're going to ask those leading questions, like, do you feel safe at home? That kind of thing. They're going to open it up so that you can sort of explore that, within yourself to sort of understand sort of what your dynamics are. So, it's a help, but again, getting this information into the hands of community members to me has been the most effective. And to be honest with you, I think when we I'm going to say the champions, the initial champions that were doing this, in the late 90s and early 2000s were really, just knowing that at the time we had high numbers, but we knew that they should be higher. And so there was all of this work. I mean, it was a huge movement. It's just gotten really, really big, which is important. But the numbers went up. And what we were saying is not because there's just all these, even though Prince George's County has a lot of social determinants, of health kind of issues around those, circumstances, people here aren't sort of predestined or ordained, and we're not just more violent, it's just not that kind of community. But what we did was we started educating people more about it, and those individuals started seeking services. So that's why it went up so high in the 2000s and the earlier 2000s. Now it's a little bit different because the numbers started to track down a little bit in terms of, getting people service and people not getting into those relationships as much. But now, in these days, there's just a lot of aggression sort of in the atmosphere. There's a lot of uncertainty, in the world and, in society. And not that that's an excuse, but people are starting who may not have otherwise acted in such a way, maybe it wasn't a learned behavior for them, but are just feeling the stress of life. We have a lot of mental health issues just in general across society. And so this is a lot of things at play that make those numbers higher. But again, we know that people will typically still go to, seek care if they have a cold. We know that people will, seek care if they have a broken bone. We know that they'll go to the dentist's office. And, it's an opportunity for us to connect with individuals because most people are not going to just the police station for just any random reason. That doesn't happen. There aren't too many places that people just generally go other than like their grocery store, So hospitals, clinics, urgent cares, they're just really good places to sort of catch people. Even if they weren't thinking to disclose, they have an opportunity. And we can ask, again, certain questions. Sometimes people come in. We have a human trafficking coordinator here who specializes in that. And she can come over and actually have a conversation if somebody suspects that somebody might be human trafficked and, ask specific questions. And that's the value of us too being in a hospital, because again, you could have come here for, to give blood. You could have come here for cancer treatment. You could have had a baby here. You could have, whatever the case was that you're coming here for. And if you even mentioned it to the nurse, like thinking just in passing, I'm going to mention it to, him or her, and they catch wind of it, they might call, they're trained actually to call us. They're trained to call us, and we have an advocate go over and just sort of, talk to the person, give them their options, explore sort of what's happening. So that's a key and a critical resource for this hospital for sure.
In conversations about domestic violence, there are two quotes that I hear come up a lot. One of them you touched on during your presentation, actually. That one is that the most dangerous time for a victim is when they are trying to leave. And the other quote that I hear a lot is that it takes an average of 7 times for someone to finally leave their abuser. And so my question is, one, are these quotes accurate? And two, is it helpful to parrot these quotes as often as they are? I use parrot for lack of a better term because I think, I don't know, it's, I don't know, I guess you can just start there.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, I haven't used those expressions in quite some time. I think, again, in the earlier 2000s, people were really trying to hit home for folks to understand what was at play. Because we had a lot of law enforcement that was just sort of coming on board, because, you're probably too young to remember this, Tiana, but there used to be a time that, police officers would respond to a domestic violence call, which is one of the probably the most dangerous times for law enforcement. They show up, and again, I'm going to be heteronormative here, and the man would say, they'd ask him, like, what happened? And he might be right there with his partner, his female partner, and actually, let's say the police are asking her, and then she's looking at him like, what do I say? And he's giving her the eye, like, you better not say anything, and then that's where you heard what was really parroted back then was like, oh, I hit my head on the cabinet. That's how I got a black eye. I ran into the door and that kind of thing. So that's what the law enforcement would hear. And they would come out to the same house over and over and over again. And it started to get really frustrating and stuff for them. So there wasn't a lot of investment in that. But once they were trained to understand that, yeah, you can go back. You're going to keep going back to this group, this household until she's ready to make a break, or they have somebody unfortunately gets killed, or somehow they're able to get away from one another. But when a perpetrator has who they consider a good victim, they're not inclined to let them go, and that's why it is so dangerous when they leave. And so a lot of that has to do with law enforcement involvement and trying to get folks to care and to get them out of the house. And so, that's why you would hear things like, or there was a movement started to actually help individuals like have a bag packed and maybe at a friend's house, so that if they had to leave, they could get it from there. And then you had underground, networks of individuals. It might be, a woman in Pennsylvania, or it could be a family in Atlanta, where folks would know that they could go there to have shelter and so forth. And this is before there were shelters. So, a lot of this has grown. A lot of this is, again, we've come at it for all these different angles, and we've done a really good job, I think, as all service providers really honing in on the issue. But it still holds true. It still holds true. It still takes a person quite some time to leave a partner. I've even seen a video where the police were just like, if you don't leave, you're gonna get killed. And then literally the next day, that person got killed by their perpetrator. And there's a lot of psychological factors with that, because if you think, a person that has been partnered with somebody for so long, like, they know each other. They do know each other, and they know when a person is serious. And so the main two reasons why people will stay, but like, there's a variety of reasons, but the main two are love, because you always remember the good stuff, right? And domestic violence is cyclical. I mean, there are some incidences where there's like this sort of one-off, and some people will argue that that's not the case, but where there's like this sudden like crime of passion, and somebody's like, puts their hands on somebody or something. But generally there's this cycle. So again, I mentioned before, when I was the bad guy dating Audrey, that, it was like this honeymoon phase. We're like, everything is great. Everything is gravy. We love each other. Nothing can go wrong. And then Audrey starts, just doing things for herself and, just she goes where she wants to go. She has a few friends that like to hang out. She wants to do girls' night. And I'm like, no, I don't want that. I start intimidating her. I start doing types of things to, get in her face and make her feel worrisome, make her feel like she's going to really lose this relationship. And, she doesn't want that. She wants a relationship. So she's going to make those accommodations. And then, but she's still going to try and maintain some of her own agency. And I have to break her down from that. And if she's not giving me exactly what I want, maybe I want to use her car. And she's saying that, she's not going to let me. Nope. I'm going to hit you and I'm going to do all these things and so forth. So that love, even though that happened, he'll come back or I'll come back and say, oh, Audrey, I'm so sorry. I love you so much. I got tickets to see Taylor Swift, or I got tickets to see Beyonce. Let's go and let's whatever. And I pull her back in. So she remembers all those good things. She's going to remember the concert. She's going to remember the dining, the whining, the whole nine. And you sort of phase out those bad parts. And that's just with any kind of relationship. You tend to do those things. And so love is going to make her want to stay. But that fear, if that person has gotten to the point where like this has been happening so much, and each time that there's this physical violence, it ratchets up. So it could be starting with like a push, and then all of a sudden it moves to a grab, and then it moves to a slap, and then a punch, and then maybe I use a fork, stick her in her hand, or maybe I strangle her, or maybe I pull her hair out. Like it just starts to escalate. And at a certain point, when you've been in it so long, and this is sort of the dance that you've created, often you blame yourself, like, I'm so stupid, I should have left a long time ago. And, you feel that kind of way. But you also feel, so that's that stigma and that shame. But then you also know that he has said he's going to kill me, or I feel like this person's going to kill me. And if I leave and I don't really have a good escape plan and he catches me, like I'm going to die. But if I stay here, he might hit me and he might do this thing and I might die. I might be able to keep him from doing that if I'm so good and I do all these great things for him and I accommodate him and whatever it is, which may lead to even human trafficking. It could lead to certain types of sexual assaults and that kind of thing. But you're going to stay in that thinking that you can sort of calm the situation. But when you leave, no. There's something devastating that can happen. So you're sort of in that sort of position. So it's a lot of nuance to it. It's very complicated. And of course, every person is different, but it does take people multiple times to leave. And there's certain things that you want to have in place. We've talked to people about protective orders and, paper, having that is important, but paper does not stop bullets. It does not stop knives. There are people that get killed when they're having exchange of kids, in custody, that type of thing. So there's a lot that's involved and it requires a lot of wraparound services. And so places like, DVSAC, other places are really important in terms of trying to create a plan and a path forward that will help somebody if they choose to leave the house and make sure that they're safe. So all of that is true. Tiana.
Excuse me. One of the things that you talked about, patient-centered care, the idea that you honor what the patient wants at the time. Because, I think it's easy for us on the outside sometimes to see more than what the person who is on the inside can see. It's very frustrating.
Yes.
And it's one of those situations where I've always wondered, I've had a few friends, one who is no longer with us, who, the signs were there. We knew, but there was no, and she would go in medical, and I think everybody knew on some level. And what are some of the ways that make, when you're talking to patients about, okay, if you go back after 16, is there like way to say, if you go back, there's a 90% chance that this might happen? Because you mentioned the fact that, half of the cases, rape cases in PG County, are domestic violence. And then, we have one of the highest domestic violence related homicide cases, like, in the state. So we're not talking about like, yeah, I might shove somebody, but I mean, this is obviously escalating in our community. What are the ways that we as like friends and family can, help, if not, make people feel like they have resources, that they have options, rather than, just saying, oh, he's a jerk, that's terrible,
Yeah.
or, because I know you should break up with him, that kind of stuff doesn't always, but how do we say, in a way that kind of breaks through anything,
Oh, Audrey, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry about the loss of your friend. I actually had a circumstance like that as well. One of my college friends, and that was after I was in the field. I didn't even know I was looking for her, and discovered that had happened. So I understand the devastation, and I really am sorry that you had to go through that. But it's just so hard. Again, all of these are individualized approaches. And so what works for one person is not going to necessarily work for another person. I will say that in terms of, and I don't do direct services much anymore. I'll help out here and there. But when I was doing direct services, I think the thing that was most impactful was for women who had children in particular, and young children, to sort of help them understand that if you get killed in this relationship, you're leaving your children with this person, particularly if they're the father, of course, assuming. You're leaving them with this person, and what might he do to them if you're not here? So want you to be strong for yourself. But if you can't be strong for yourself, perhaps you can be strong for your child. And again, we are patient centered. And so we would never say, you have to leave. You can't really say, because it's not true, that there's a 90% chance that you're going to, die the next time. There are some statistics around strangulation where we know that individuals who have been strangled as part of their victimization have a 750% higher likelihood of being killed by that person, but we don't know when that might be. We also know that individuals who are both raped and physically assaulted in their relationship have a higher risk of dying at the hands of that person. And all we can do is convey that information and give them the resources. And that's another reason why it's important that we have a counselor here and other counselors around the county, whether it's well, I'm trying to think. I think Family Justice Center. I think there is like a SIP program there that they have counseling, and Kathy has counseling. There are a lot of people that are doing counseling. And then there's also we're equipping mental health, just sort of behavioral health, mental health service providers with information about this, so that when they're having these one-on-one sessions with individuals, or even group sessions, there's, people can share those stories and sort of get to a place where they feel more comfortable leaving. But for those who stay, I'll give you an example really quickly, as I know we're running out of time. I remember having cases where people did not want to leave. And so it's like, well, how do you, but there was a pattern. There was a pattern where, Johnny would come home every Friday, and would be drunk. And they use that as an excuse. That's not an excuse. But there were certain factors that person could see that would lead up to the incidences. And so I was like, well, if this is the case, we can maybe help you stay safe. So we had a closet. There was a designated walk-in closet in their home. And they had a pillow in there, a blanket, change of clothes, a little refrigerator with water and different things. And they knew that if they heard that person drive up and they were intoxicated, they would retreat to that room, they put the lock on it, and they would just stay in there. Like, that's something that could happen. Then you had other people that had code words. So if Kyla's my friend and I'm going through something, he might let me call Kyla, so I don't leave the house. but I feel like something's going to happen. And I call Kyla, and the word is canary. And I say, oh, there was a canary in the backyard or something. And then Kyla knows to call 911. So there are a lot of different things. A lot of it is sort of just like being creative, and thinking about like how you can help somebody. I remember talking, and I still will talk to people about if you're going to be in the house, if you're in the house, that you could like, don't argue. If you have an argument, sort of come out of the bathroom, because it's so small that, if you get hit, first of all, there's like porcelain, basins, so you could crack your head and that kind of thing. If you're in the kitchen, somebody can grab a weapon. So try and leave those areas. Try to get to a place where there's more room, there's less likely to have those actually accidental injuries. Because the person may not be intending to kill you that time, but just because of where you are or the circumstances, this may happen. So, so you just have to really, think about these things, and really you just don't give up. You can. People don't like often being told what to do either. So, just giving them information and letting them know. And I actually have a slide. Kyla, if you can pop up the presentation, I'll show you really quickly. Let me see here. Let me just do this. Where am I here? So this is a trauma-informed approach to working with victims. And so I think just critically important, if you have a friend, if anybody out there is dealing with anyone, and this is something that we use internally in the hospital, but anybody can use it. You want to maintain privacy to let them know, you don't want to have it, in the middle of a party. Maybe you take somebody out to lunch and just say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. I'm concerned, that type of thing. If there's anything you want to share with me, you can let me know. However way I can help you, I will. You also want to do it in a non-judgmental, fashion. You want to, just educate them, give them brochures or resources, or just say, hey, I was watching something the other day on YouTube or on the library, system, and there are these 4 incredible women that were talking about domestic violence. You should watch that video or something like that. You're gonna just try and get them connected to services. Getting stuff in their hand is really important, because that way they can look at it and they can have it, whenever. Now, you do have to be careful, because sometimes if the perpetrator sees those things, they can get, elevate in terms of their hostility. But we have like these little shoe cards. I don't think I have one now, but they're about, so big, and, they're tiny, and, you can put them in your shoe, so a person can always have it. They can just put it underneath the insert, and they can pull it out if they ever feel, when they're ready, but if they can read it. Asking, what they'd like to share, asking them what they might need. And so, and then of course, this last part, and this goes to what you were saying, like everybody knew, but that person wasn't ready to receive it. And that's just the unfortunate reality. I'm out in the community often, and mothers all the time. My daughter this, my, granddaughter that, my niece and this. And I understand, but, part of relationship building, it's a process. No one got it right off the, break. A lot of the things that we have learned is just through trial and error, and, experience. So it's easy for us to say to young people, like, don't do this, but sometimes it's just unfortunate reality that people have to walk the path that they're going to walk, and all we can do is just try our best with it. And it's just unfortunate. It's just hard. This is hard. You just can't make somebody do something that they're not ready to do. It's just like, if anybody has an addiction, they have to want it for themselves, and they have to be ready. So I don't know if there's anything that I said that might be helpful. But yeah, you just, that non-judgment is critical, and just respecting their wishes, and just being responsive as you can, and just keep letting them know what services are available.
I know the smartest thing that college did, my freshman year, was they kind of gave us this little survey about if your boyfriend does X, then Y. And it was the first time anyone had put all that in one place and told me this is abusive. Like this is, you know, and it really kind of guided my, you know, time in college in a lot of ways, because it was helpful, you know. And I was just, I think too, like helping, you know, educate folks as to what constitutes domestic violence. I know we had recently a very well-known individual and very high up in our government, you know, kind of made a comment recently about, you know, that it shouldn't be a crime for a man to rape his wife. And, you know, these are the things, you know, here we are, you've been around for 50 years, and here we are still having this conversation.
Wow.
Strangulation has just recently been added into the law. We are coming forward, I think, but it is, you know, I think a lot of us feel, you know, that I'm a little afraid we're going backwards. And so it's, you know, that education piece that you're doing is so important.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. It certainly is. I had not heard about that. So I can come back in April when it's Sexual Assault Awareness Month and we can talk about that one, because that whole history of rape and ownership, that's like a whole other thing. But it was something that you said that I lost track of that I wanted to mention. I wanted to say something about, I'm going to tell you. That's the hazards of being a Gen Xer. You know, there's pros and cons. Audrey, what did you say?
Was it about strangulation or was it about?
No, it was before that. But strangulation is definitely a critical issue in terms of servicing. You definitely want to make sure that you come to the hospital for that and get yourself a CTA. And we have. You have to come in. I do want to say this. You do have to come through the emergency room for any of the services that you're going to receive here at the hospital. It's just the reality of it. Now, we do have our own center here, and we will do an intake. Even if we schedule you to come here for an appointment, whether it's domestic violence or sexual assault, you still have to come in through the emergency room department. And I do want to say that this is a place where you can report confidentially and your privacy is maintained. So you don't have to disclose. You do have to disclose who you are in terms of your admittance into the hospital, but in terms of the services associated with us, that you can remain anonymous. So if you want to be a Jane Doe or a John Doe, you can do that. And again, whether you have law enforcement, that's your choice. And there are a lot of ways to report with that, where you're given a case number, you're identified by a number and not by your name. So it's important to sort of, you know, underscore that. But in terms of that strangulation, yes, I talked about it being a 750% higher likelihood of you dying at the hands of that perpetrator. But often there's damage that you don't see. And this kind of goes to a question I think one of you all mentioned in terms of screening. Or actually into you too, Audrey, about like how do you talk to people about these issues? Often people will come in and they'll say, like, I was choked out, or they're not sure if they were choked or strangled, which is the technical term for it. They'll come in, and so we'll have an advocate. And so our advocate, you know, a nurse might say, well, I think something happened. They're saying that they were had a physical incident with their partner. Not really sure what happened. Can you come over and talk to them? And then the advocate will come over. And the advocate would maybe ask questions like, so you were arguing with your partner? And the person might say yes, or in this case, it says yes. Well, what's the last thing that you remember? Well, I was standing in the hallway of the bathroom, and we were having this huge argument. And I remember they lunged towards me, and then I don't remember anything. Well, you don't remember anything? Well, I woke up and I was in the den and I was on the couch. And so you don't remember how you got there. So that cues us into knowing that something happened, that they had a loss of consciousness. So if there's no abrasion on the head, if there's no lumps or what have you, we can suspect strongly that that person may have been strangled. And it's hard to tell with people that are fair skinned or don't have as much melanin. You can often see, red and marks on the skin. But the more melanin you have, the more difficult it is to see that. So I'm going to say in this case, maybe it's somebody that's highly melanated. that's talking. And so, we'll ask those questions. Well, we'll ask with it no matter who, but for the scenario, we might say, well, like we suspect it, but we're just not sure. So that's the last thing you remember. You woke up and did that. Okay. Are these the clothes that you wore? Are these the clothes that you were wearing when you were having the argument? No, they're not. I changed my clothes. Well, why did you change your clothes? I changed my clothes because I urinated on myself or I defecated on myself. And that's an automatic no for us. We already know that that person has been strangled because, when you've been strangled to that degree, you will lose control of your bowels or your urination. And so in that case, we want to make sure that they don't necessarily get bumped up in terms of, who gets prioritized across the hospital. But we know that this person definitely is a high lethality risk factor. We want to make sure that we get them that CTA scan. We want to make sure that we can see any kind of injuries underneath the skin. And we have these special light source cameras that can actually look under the skin. So we won't be able to see like fingerprints, but we can see like marks. So we can see the handprints underneath the skin. We can help determine how deep those marks go and whether there's been any kind of issue with regard to your, carotid artery or your trachea tubes and things of that nature, if there's anything that's crushed, hoarseness and that type of thing. And so we want to make sure those people get care because it could be that happened to you and you didn't go to the hospital. Maybe you felt like it was routine, it wasn't a big deal. And then, 2 weeks later, you have a stroke. And the reason you have a stroke is because when you were strangled, there was plaque that may have been released that went to the brain or so forth, or maybe there was a clot that ended up happening that, went someplace. So it's very critically important that we connect folks to care in that way. So strangulation is definitely something that we look at seriously. And we are seeing that there are more instances of strangulation related homicides and events happening in our county within the start of this year, significantly higher.
I know that we're just a little bit over time, but I want to do two things. And so first of all, I'm going to make a comment that goes back to or offer a discussion point to go back to something that Audrey and you, Kathy, talked about. And then I'm going to have a closing question about resources that I'm going to ask. And then we'll go to closing remarks. So I'm also letting that know for people who are watching, we are a little bit over, but it shouldn't be too much longer. I just wanted to add something to the conversation with Audrey and Kathy. And I really appreciate the fact that you talked about really trying to come from a place of no judgment. And I appreciated, Audrey, you expressing something that I think a lot of people feel, which maybe it can be a little bit of frustration or like, I don't understand. And then Kathy also sort of mirrored that, like someone in a situation might feel judgment. They might feel like, oh, I'm stupid that I've stayed this long. And you can see from this conversation where you can sort of see those two twin tracks there. And so one of the things that I have just learned in this long life that I have lived is that and I think Kathy highlighted, she talked about this, I just want to highlight it, which is that when you're in the situation, you actually have some control. When I'm here, if I just do this situation can be okay. I know how to manage this person. It doesn't mean I manage them 100% of the time. That's not what I'm saying. But in this moment, I know that if I do this, I can minimize or I can control. I have some element of control. In leaving, you have no control. So maybe you got the negative stuff 20% of the time, but now you have it 100% of the time. And so I think just recognizing that as people are navigating these, like that there is this was a whole conversation for a long time, but I just did want to kind of highlight that part because I feel like it was such a great thing that you two were discussing. And just for those of us who are watching maybe, and we have a friend in this situation, or we're maybe in the situation ourselves, to recognize the strength and ingenuity and creativity to be in those situations in the best way possible. And also how that the lack of that control and power and leaving also means giving up any type of control in that situation. And you just get the bad stuff all the time. That's my comment. My question is,
Can I say something really quickly before you ask your last question?
Yeah.
And I will say, and this is for you all here, Audrey and Kyla and Tiana, but for anybody else listening too, in terms of red flags, there are a lot of red flags, but I will say, just if I don't say anything else, that getting quick romances, being love bombed and accepting that very often, that's a red flag for sure, for sure. Having a relationship where you meet somebody in January and then you're moving in with one another in April, huge red flags. Don't tie yourself to a person that is trying to move in that way. I say that for young people out there. Please, those are definite red flags. I mean, when we see it happen among young people, that's typically what has happened. And then also too, being called out of your name is a crucial thing. So for your friend, sometimes we think that that's so benign. And, especially when you're young, to be called a B or a H or, I don't know how you spell some of these things, but, you're this, you're C word, you're this. And sometimes it's done sort of, you're not sure, but like a little lighthearted, it's, sort of gaslighty. You're not really sure like if it's whatever intended, but those little things they test a boundary. And if you will be accepted, if you will accept being called out of your name, they're going to keep pushing that line. But it usually starts with that. If you don't hold the line there and just say, oh, no way, Jose, or I'm out of here, you're setting yourself up for the potential of something. Not saying it's a guarantee, but those things or any of those things in combination, definitely red flags. Watch out. Be wary.
Thank you. And I know here's my question. Okay. I'm just sneaking a question and then we're going to close. I promise.
Okay.
Please stay with us. So if someone's listening right now and they're thinking, I kind of feel like maybe this conversation might be about me, or it's about a situation I'm maybe in, I'm not really sure, I don't really know what to do. Kathy, could you please tell us some numbers, some contact information that you have that we can share for the viewers, so we make sure that viewers know where to go? Hey, you want to talk to somebody, this doesn't feel quite right. Where do you want us to send them?
I actually have a slide for that, I think. I think I have a last slide.
There you go.
Let's see. Yes, I do. So this is our center, and hopefully you can see the number down there. It's 240-677-2337. That is a number that you can call. Again, it's 24/7. It doesn't matter what time you call. Somebody is going to pick up that phone. Again, we're incredibly well staffed. I want to say I may have this reverse, but we have 14 FNEs. We have 16 domestic violence advocates here. We're again recruiting for volunteers. So if you're interested in this field and helping out, please, you can call this number and they can transfer you to my office for purposes of that. But this is the number that you want to call. And there are other service providers out here. There's Family Justice Center. Again, there's Kathy. There are plenty. The Sheriff's Office has an incredible program as well. But this is the place that you can come for comprehensive services, because you can get the medical, get treated for STIs related to any kind of sexual assault. Even if it's HIV, prophylactically, we can treat folks and just make sure, again, that they're whole. So, and to me, that's just the most important thing. So please, call us as you need to. And even if you don't want to get the rest of our services here, you can get your medical care here. You can talk to our nurses. And then if you want to do your counseling someplace else, that's fine too. But we do have in-house counseling. And we also have a drop-in groups here at the hospital every other Thursday. And I think the next one is going to be on, I think it's the 9th. So this Thursday. So if individuals want to come at 6 o'clock, they can come in to do that as well. So.
All right. Well, we are unfortunately out of time. Kathy, thank you so much for your time with us today. And thank you for all that you do with our community. To those of you tuning in, I thank you for taking the time to be with us today. We have been sharing links in the chat. throughout the program, to the Office of Human Rights, the University of Maryland Medical System. And we hope that you take the time to review those resources, share them with those that you think may benefit from them. We have a bunch of great programs coming up, and I invite you all to check out the Office of Human Rights website at civilrights.mypg.us to learn more about all that they do. And while you're visiting it, do click on the Human Trafficking tab to learn more about that division and the Prince George's County Human Trafficking Task Force. I do believe that we also have a video with them that we did not too long ago that you're more than welcome to go check out on YouTube. Also, please visit the library's website at pgcmls.info/events to see all the great things that we're doing every single day. Thank you so much again, and we hope to see you soon. Take care.
All right, thanks. Bye.